Just wanted to thank everyone for joining us on your volunteer time to our PAC meeting 4A. This will initiate our fourth milestone of our PAC meetings. As I run through this general housekeeping information, just please remain muted until that conversational portion of the presentation begins. You have access to the features of Zoom, so you can raise your hand or use any of the reaction features in the reaction pane. You can also use the chat box function where you can insert comments or questions via text at any point in time. We do have a lot of information to go through today, so feel free to ask us to stop or pause if you would like some more information or time on some of the information that we are going through today. This presentation, you'll hear from myself and also the Deputy Project Manager, David Schweitzer, on the information. So again, here's our agenda for today. Going to review milestone 3, go through the preliminary screening results of our first round of screening, and then also go through the next steps. And again, always please feel free to ask questions, raise your hand at any time. And I or one of the chat moderators will be alerted. And once we get to a good stopping point, we can address those questions or comments. Okay, we're going to get into our review of the last milestone. We introduced you all to the universe of alternatives in the last milestone. The universe was comprised of these 4 groupings: the no-build, travel modes, rehabilitation alternatives, and then also replacement alternatives. The no-build alternative basically includes the alternative where no improvements other than the maintenance of the existing structures and roads remain in place. Travel modes alternatives, we looked at other modes of travel such as bus rapid transit, light rail, heavy rail, pedestrian options, and other items like that. The rehabilitation alternatives, we focused on the major rehabilitation of the I-84 structures. And then for the replacement alternatives, that looked at the complete replacement of the interchange. We identified various alignment options and also system connections for those. 23 alternatives have been identified in the universe of alternatives. As a group, we went through the features of each of the 4 groupings, highlighting the opportunities, challenges, constraints, and the considerations that were made in developing this universe of alternatives. This resulted in many similar alternatives and also some with very unique features. As David will go through some of the description of those features, we kind of want to highlight that these alternatives were looked at somewhat of a Mr. Potato Head aspects where you can kind of add and subtract and mix and match certain aspects of an alternate to develop some full alternatives. As the PEL study progresses, we will go through each of these alternatives in more detail. Today's meeting will focus on the alternatives that failed to pass this first level of screening. And I do want to remind everyone that there will be 2 additional levels of screening after this one is completed. And once the public also has a chance to provide their input as well. These 23 alternatives were further broken down into more similar groupings as well. And as we get through this presentation, those additional groupings will be highlighted. So the level 1 analysis was engineering based. We wanted to focus on the improvements that are possible for the identified deficiencies, so the needs that we identified, and the feasible solutions. So that would be the purpose of the project. We asked the question, can this conceptual alternative satisfy the purpose of the project, and if there are any fatal flaws? We took the purpose and need, the transportation portion of it, and use this as that first gut check of the criteria. The potential community environmental impact that many of you all are interested in will occur in the 2 subsequent levels, but this initial level was really engineering based and will be pass or fail. So the project team took the purpose and need and we translated them into evaluation criteria. Beginning with the structural, the evaluation that we looked at is whether or not the alternative improved or replaced the deteriorating bridge structures. For the geometric criteria, we wanted to make sure that the alternative addresses and improves the conditions that do not meet the current design standards. And then for the operational criteria, we really wanted to make sure that the interchange would function with the current traffic and the future traffic projections. So those high volume movements would be direct connections, meaning that you can go to either main line without needing to take an exit and use the local road network, or the lower volume movements, those would be indirect connections where you would use the local road network to make those connections. We also identified fatal flaws, and those fatal flaws were cost and feasibility. I do want to highlight that we have an agency coordination meeting tomorrow, where we will meet with federal and state agencies to get their feedback on any fatal flaws or additional goals and objectives that we can look at in the next subsequent screening levels. For cost, we just wanted to make sure that financial resources could be made available for the alternative. And then feasibility, we looked at if the alternative could be constructed using proven technology and techniques, general constructability aspects, as well as making sure that traffic could be allowed to operate during the construction. So looking at the funnel, or the top part of the funnel, we took all that criteria, we took all the universe of alternatives, and we evaluated the alternatives against each of those criteria. Some alternatives advanced and other alternatives remained in PAC, which would be a fail at this point in time. And we'll provide you all with more information on why some of those items failed and which aspects were determined to be fatally flawed for the alternatives that we have gone through. So we'll get into those preliminary screening results. So these are the preliminary screening results. They're not final. I do want to highlight that they're not final yet until we meet with the public. Again, the PAC is ahead of the public as you all help us to refine the information and present that key information to the public as well. So 23 total conceptual alternatives were identified in the universe. 13 of those conceptual alternatives are proposed to be dismissed at this first level of screening. And what that means is that they failed to address that transportation need or are fatally flawed. 9 alternatives are proposed to advance, and these alternatives at this very early level appear to address the transportation need and are not fatally flawed. Those will move on into the next level where they will be further developed, more than just conceptual. And in level 2, we'll have more information about these alternatives and begin to evaluate and screen them on many of the topics that many of you are interested in, such as the economic, community, and potential environmental impacts. While the level 2 screening is a little bit more detailed, I do want to highlight that the analysis will still be relatively high level as this is a planning study. Finally, I do want to highlight that there is a no-build alternative. This is the alternative that includes no improvements outside general maintenance and safety improvements. Although it would not address those needs, it must be retained for future evaluations and comparison analysis to other alternatives. So here are the screening results, or the groupings for the level 1 universe of alternatives. We've identified 4 major groupings, the no-build, travel modes, and the major ID4 rehabilitations. And then we have the replacement alternatives, which were broken down into some smaller groupings. Reconstruction in place, the full system interchanges, partial system interchanges, ground level options, and then also bypass alignments. This is a sneak peek of how the alternatives will be grouped together in our level 1 report, and also on the website when we can put these on the website for additional public input and feedback. And these are the preliminary results. We'll go through each of these results in a little bit more detail. The red are the items that have appear to not satisfy this purpose and need, and also are fatally flawed. And in this presentation, we'll go through which features were fatally flawed or appear to not address the transportation deficiencies. In the level 1 screening report, you will see a screening matrix. This is just a sneak peek. On the left, we have the conceptual alternatives and their names. To the right, on top, we have the screening criteria. Each of these alternatives and the screening criteria either got a pass or a fail determination. Just as a reminder, any fail at this level of screening means that the alternative is proposed to be dismissed from further evaluation. And I do want to highlight that if it is dismissed at this level, we would not be seeing the alternative again in a future level of screening. So as we get into the core of the presentation, just want you all to keep that in mind. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask about these alternatives. Again, being in the PAC, you're slightly ahead of the public. So these are not final dismissed alternatives yet, but we are proposing for these alternatives to the ones that failed to be dismissed from further evaluation. So to get into the our results, I do want to start with the no build alternative. And again, the no build is the existing interchange. No construction other than general maintenance activities will occur. If we zoom in on this graphic, it is just the interchange as it exists today. Nothing really changes. All of the deficiencies that we've identified will continue to operate at a less than ideal manner. So this would be our baseline condition, no improvements of deficiencies. As you can see, it failed to meet our preliminary purpose and need, and it also has some fatal flaw for the feasibility criteria. Again, this no build will be retained for further evaluation and subsequent levels, just for comparative analysis for any of the potential alternatives that continue to move forward and appear to be viable and reasonable. Moving on, we have the travel modes. This includes bus transit, rapid transit, light rail, heavy rail, additional bus lanes, and pedestrian bicycle access and things like that. Do want to highlight that the project team is aware of a lot of the government proposal directives and initiatives to reduce the vehicle's miles travel, and that could result in fewer cars on the road. Do want to highlight that Waterbury in this area is in a very unique situation, and this is a transportation project. So as while we do have a lot of these travel modes being a fail for the preliminary purpose and need statement and the feasibility criteria, I do want to highlight that these other travel modes will be considered as potential complementary features, where this is part of that Mr. Potato Head type of thing where we can incorporate certain aspects into an alternative or support certain transit alternative modes of travel in an alternative and move it forward, but it doesn't alone improve the deficiencies that we've highlighted. So where some reduction in congestion could be a possibility with additional modes of travel, we don't see it as actually fully satisfying the transportation needs in this area. But as I mentioned, it could be incorporated as a complementary feature for whatever the new mix ends up being. Before we move on, just want to ask if there are any questions before we get into the rehabilitation and replacement groupings. Okay, as we move on, I'm going to hand it over to David to introduce the rehabilitation alternatives.
All right, thank you, Naomi. And just to stress again, if there's any time a question comes up, please ask your question. As we get through each of these alternates, I'll try to pause at the end. We do have people monitoring the chat rooms if you feel more comfortable putting your question in there, but we do want to answer your questions as we're going through these. All right, so we're going to start out with the rehab alternates. Now, the rehab alternates is we focused a lot on the decks of I-84, as these decks were never replaced. Those are the original decks out there. We're looking at some complex, lengthy construction sequencing that's going to be out there in order to replace this. And then we also look on the return on the investment that we're going to have, because we're going to have, by 2045, these will be 80-year-old structures. And with any rehab project that you'll notice, your opportunities, especially to improve the needs and deficiencies we found on this project, are very limited. So now as we get into the first alternate, oh, I'm sorry, we'll look at the recap of them. So here are the 4 of them. You can see their report cards, and we're going to get into each one of these 4 starting right now. The first one that we're going to look at is the true rehab. What this will do is we will not be building new structure, and you're looking at the core, we will rehab what is there, and at the end, we will have the same project. We'll have the same footprint that we have today. So there will be, while the structures will be improved, and that will be the concrete decks, plus some steel and concrete repairs, we are not going to be making any geometric improvements, and we will not be improving the traffic operation. So our level of service will still be at the same spot we were at, and we will experience a lot of delays during construction. So as you look at this report, you can see we fail on the geometric, our traffic operational, and the feasibility criteria is based on those traffic disruptions that we'll have during construction. So this option was viewed as a fail. The next option that we looked at, this was the I-84 westbound rehab while building a new I-84 eastbound. So as we zoom in on this, if you look at the cross section that's in the lower left, you can see that we have built a new eastbound barrel at the same elevation that it is at today to the south. So we'll be unstacking the bridges. What this new eastbound structure will be overbuilt so that it can handle the bidirectional traffic during construction. So we'll put both eastbound and westbound up there. Then we'll be able to remove the upper level of the existing structure and then rehab the existing westbound, and then be able to return traffic as it's shown here with eastbound on the new structure and westbound on its existing structure. So if we look back at the report card on this, you can see that in the westbound direction, we're still going to have the same geometrics that are out there today that do not meet the modern criteria. We'll also have poor levels of service on the westbound. While traffic-wise, our constructability and maintaining traffic, there's a better plan in place for that. This is still going to fail due to the geometric and traffic controlling criteria. Okay, the next option to look at is the I-84 bridge rehab with a bypass roadway built, then repurposed as a frontage road. So as we zoom in on this, if you look at the cross section, which is going to be up in the upper right-hand corner, what we look to do is we look to build a bypass road, which would be to the south to handle the 84 traffic. And then we would put both the eastbound and westbound traffic on the structure while we rehab both eastbound and the westbound bridges. Then at the end of the project, we would move the eastbound and westbound traffic back over to the existing structures. And then this bypass road would be converted to an eastbound frontage road where we'd take all the local traffic off and bring them down, in essence, replacing exits 21 and 22 by having intersections with both Bank and then terminating at South Main Street. So if we look at the report card on this, what we get here is that, yes, we're improving the structures because we're replacing those decks, but we're not designing to modern design standards. We're still failing geometrically, and then we'd be back to our same levels of service on both the eastbound and the westbound. So this alternate is looked at as a fail. The last rehab option that we looked at entails widening the structures to the north side so we could rehab them and stage our construction across. So if we zoom in on this, you can see the existing conditions on the left side and what our final proposed conditions would look like on the right side. And what we are doing is we are widening to the north side, extending out the stacked condition so that we can remove the upper portion of the existing northerly columns that are there. We'd be able to build another full lane of traffic, and then we would stage our construction as we worked across rehabbing the bridge. So we'd have a lot of construction phases during this in order to be able to complete this. So now if we go to our report card on this, what we are finding is that we're only making some minor improvements to our geometric deficiencies. We're not correcting all of them. So this would still be looked at as a fail. And from our traffic capacity, we're still not providing the adequate capacity. We have failing levels of service. So this is also viewed as a fail. So our next slide is looking back at these 4 rehab alternates. And just to stress, I mean, these rehabs is for all the bridges within the interchange in both main lines and the system ramps, but we are focused a lot more on the I-84 structures as these structures have not had the decks replaced. And as we came out, you can see that all 4 of these failed, mostly on the geometric and the traffic operational criteria is where they got failing grades. So
yeah, and I did want to just jump in and add that while the structures are improved, the steel that is out there will only be patched. So consider it as a Band-Aid type of situation where we'd have to go back and continually maintain that that steel that's out there. We don't really know how often yet, but the existing steel would essentially remain for these rehab options if they were to move forward. And that would result in some concerns. Again, David mentioned this earlier with that return on investment for these rehab alternatives.
all right. Now we'll get into the replacement alternatives. And again, these are 8 of them that failed. But one thing that goes on with these replacement alternates, we're looking at complete replacement of the I-84 and the Route 8 structures. And with those new main lines and the new structures, we have all new connections. So we can get rid of those left-hand on and off ramps. And we can get rid of some of the sharper curvature and bring these up to the modern design standards. So when you're looking at this, you look at the needs and goals that we have for this, we have a lot more opportunities to meet these. Now, as we go into these replacement alternates, the things that come into play, we still have, as designers, we have our concern, our constraints, and our considerations as we're going through this. Remember, we still have that high ridge line on the west side. We have the Naugatuck River, we have the Mad River, we have the rail line. So you have to keep in mind on this topography, and then you have other features, such as Union Station or the historic Riverside Cemetery, that are all considerations for the designers as we go through this. And one other thing really to consider as we zoom in on the structures, remember that the existing is a 4-level structure on this interchange, which helps us separate traffic and make all the existing movements possible out there. So these are all things as designers that we were going at while laying out these alternates. And remember, everything with these alternates, everything is on the table. Nothing's been dismissed. So there are some ideas that are tried and looked at and evaluated, and they can fail out. And as we're talking this, as Naomi had put, as this Mr. Potato Head approach, where one feature looks great, we're going to advance that. There are other features that are looked at and analyzed and then dismissed, and those aren't used again. So these are the 8 that we're going to look at. And you can see the report cards here, but we're going to get into each one of these individually right now. And again, there'll be things I'm explaining as we go through these. If there are questions, please ask your question, pop it into the chat box. Naomi or somebody else will gladly interrupt me, and we'll answer your question. So the first one we're going to look at is ID4 reconstruction in place. So if we zoom in on the core of this interchange, what we're looking to do is to build ID4, unstack it, but build it back in its original footprint so we can minimize the amount of impacts that we're going to have and stay pretty close to within the right-of-way that we have. What we are finding with this, if we are going to unstack this and build where we're at, we would have to find a way to handle this traffic. And that was a big problem we were having when we were looking through all the rehab alternates, is how do you handle this ID4 traffic if you have to replace it? And in this situation, we have to be removing the existing viaduct in order to build the new back in. So then if we go back to our report card, we're finding that this is a fail just due to the in-place reconstruction. We'd have major traffic disruptions in order to do this. So this alternate was a fail. But again, it's one of these options that we needed to look at. Can we rebuild in place? This, we cannot. Moving ahead to the next alternate. This is the interchange shifted to the east with an inner loop ramp. All right, so if we zoom in on this, what we're showing at the core of the interchange is we're showing ID4 constructed to the south of existing. So we can maintain the ID4 traffic on the existing. Route 8 could be maintained on its existing as it's shifted to the east. But one feature we are looking, and it'd still be a full system interchange with right-hand on and off ramps. But one thing we were looking at is the system movement from eastbound to northbound. As that exists today, that's a flyover movement, which means we go up a level over 84, and we have a lot of structure to carry it up to get up to Route 8 in the north of I-84, up near the West Main Street area. So what we looked at is a feature where we could take a right-hand off ramp and get a inner loop, meaning we take a tight radius ramp to pull it back and make that maneuver. So what we were finding is that, even though we were looking to save a lot of structure, make this a more feasible project, that inner loop ramp impacted the geometric operations on 84 and then also the tightness of that curve due to the constraints would not meet the geometric criteria. So if we go forward to our report card, you can see that due to that inner loop ramp, this did not meet the geometric standards, nor did it provide the adequate capacity. So this option was looked at as a fail. Now, there are a lot of features with this that you will continue to see as we move forward and show some of these other alternates that were good features. This was just an alternate where it was looked at to see if there was something better that could be done or something else that should be looked at on a certain movement to see if that improved the overall interchange. All right, moving forward. We're going to get into the partial system crossover interchange. So as we zoom in on this, just a reminder, because I know it's been a number of months since we talked about these different features. This is a partial system crossover interchange. Now, what we're talking about there is we're talking about the system movements, okay? We have what are called our outer quad movements, which would be the system movements that connect mainline to mainline, but don't have to cross a mainline. So you can look at like the northbound to eastbound movement. It goes from northbound to eastbound, but it doesn't have to cross either 84 or Route 8 to complete the maneuver. So we don't consider those 4 outer quad movements. What we're really focusing in on is the movements that have to, the system movements that have to cross over or under Route 8 in order to make the connection to their destination. And 2 of the ramps here, and the reason this is called a partial system crossover interchange, when we look at the traffic volumes, you have movements like the westbound to southbound or the southbound to eastbound, which are heavy traffic movements and could not be brought, couldn't be brought into this to be brought down to the local level. So they had to be direct connections. So what we're really looking at here is the eastbound to northbound or the northbound to westbound movements. And what we're finding with this is that when we brought this down to the local level with these 2 movements, the traffic operations would fail on this. Now, one other feature with this alternate that I wanted to point out and discuss is that with this option, we looked at constructing I-84 to the north of the existing structure. Now, with this, in addition to some additional right-of-way impacts, we're also finding that there were issues with the constructability on how we could make this work. So if you go back to the report card, we found that the indirect connections and using the local roadway network to complete those connections did not provide the proper level of service that we needed for the traffic. And then also this moving of or rebuilding I-84 to the north, unstacking it and building it to the north resulted in some constructability issues. So overall, we found that this alternate failed based on those 2 criteria. All right. The next alternate, and this I think we're going to have a little bit of a video on this when we get there, but this is on a modified diverging diamond. Now, as we zoom in on this, a diverging diamond is a relatively new type of interchange that was brought forward so that you would be a little bit counterintuitive because you would get contraflow. As you can see here, you'd be shifting over to the left side of the roadway as the video is playing here. And what this would do is this reduces the amount of signals or traffic control you would need in order to complete an interchange, because you would have, instead of a left-hand movement across traffic where you'd have to wait for a clearance or you'd have to have a protected movement, by flipping to the opposite sides of the roadways, your left-hand movements now become more free flow. So if we zoom back to look at the core of the interchange, what we're finding is that, again, with this modern diverging, it's a modified diverging diamond, sorry. That's because what we found is that we could not do this with the actual main lines. The actual main lines would be through movements. What we're looking at is the 4 crossover system movements. The outer quad system movements would remain as direct connections, but we'd look to take these 4 the crossover system movements and bring these into this diverging diamond type of alignment. And what this was finding then is that we would have traffic signals being installed at the intersections of these system connections. And as we talked about in the previous alternate, where we had a partial system interchange, because we had 2 of the movements that had very heavy traffic flows, that is where we were finding this option to be failing, is that those heavy system movements, specifically the southbound to eastbound and the westbound to southbound movements, we would get a very poor level of service on these system movements due to this type of alignment. So if we look at our report card, what we're finding is that this DDI, or diverging diamond interchange, the geometry of some of these ramps would not meet current design standards. We also found that the level of service or our operations would fail due to the heavy volume on 2 of these system movements. So therefore, while it's a newer idea and something that needs to be looked at, our analysis showed that this failed. All right, just checking to see if there are any questions. There's a lot to digest on that one there. So the next one that we're going to look at is the at-grade system connections. So as we zoom in on this, and again, we're back to looking at the core of the interchange. And again, you're going to notice things like we're building 84 to the south of existing. That seemed to align properly with how the roadway, give us our best geometrics. And we found that it met our constructability criteria that we had. And with this, we have our outer quad movements our system connections are still taking place. You'll find that the heavier system movements that we found, particularly the southbound to eastbound and the westbound to southbound, are also direct connections in this due to their traffic volumes. But again, it's those 2 other system movements that have the lower traffic volumes, the eastbound to northbound and the northbound to westbound movements that we looked at to bring down to the local level and try to see if they could be combined with the local traffic and give us good traffic operations. And what we are finding is that the Route 8 northbound to I-84 westbound, we'd be installing what is called a Texas U-turn movement, which is, as it's highlighted up here, this would take place just before the intersection with West Main Street. And with any Texas U-turn, what you do is you exit your traffic to the left, so you're not bringing them up to the traffic control. So they would get a free flow movement off of the roadway, and then they would then get a left-hand merge. In this case, they would be onto the system movement looking to get onto westbound. So then they would get a left-hand merge onto the other system movement. So what you're trying to do is take that movement and avoid bringing them through the traffic controlled intersection to give them free flow movement. So that is what a Texas U-turn is. So we looked at the function of a Texas U-turn with that movement. And then if we look at the eastbound to northbound, we also looked at that. But what this did is, instead of bringing this up to the intersection with Meadow, we tried to keep it to the west side of the existing railroad. And what we were finding here is we were having issues with the vertical alignment of this ramp due to the railroad. And I think one other feature we wanted to point out on this alternate is this was one where we looked at the use of a roundabout within the city. And this is really at the intersection with Meadow and Field and the westbound frontage road. So this was, a feature that showed some promise, looked to function well, and that feature is brought forward into other alternates. But overall, this overall alternate, as we go to the report card, is going to show to fail. And when we get there, you see it failed. Their geometric criteria that it failed on, that's a lot to do with the westbound, the eastbound to northbound system movement. But we were finding that it did have better traffic operational capacity with those system movements, how we set them up. And then also we had the trouble with the constructability due to topography in I-84 and the location of the railroad. All right, next alternate. This alternate was looking at taking Route 8 and make a boulevard out of this. What we'd look to do is we get down into the core of the interchange here. We look to take Route 8 and bring it down to have, bring it back down to grade after the 5th Street bridge to the south. So then we would have at grade intersections with Washington, with Bank, with Sunnyside, and with Freight. And then we'd look to climb back up. So we'd have an at grade separated intersection. We'd have an at grade separation with West Main Street. So that would be combined with the local traffic for that stretch of roadway. So Riverside and Route 8 would be combined, have those traffic signals. Very similar to how Route 9 is set up in Middletown. And then we'd look to have our system connections to the north of I-84. Now, as we looked at this and we could get the analysis, again, it's something that needed to be looked at. You're always looking to, improve your roadways, or, seeing if a complete streets type of idea would work in a situation like this. We're finding this didn't work and it failed. But again, it was an alternate, needed to be looked at. As we go to our report card, you'll see that geometrically, we did not achieve modern design standards. And then our traffic operational criteria would fail a lot along Route 8. And this would require, the constructability. We were also finding a lot of issues with that. So this alternate failed. All right, moving on. Next, we're going to look at the 2 bypass options that we looked at and that failed out at the level 1 criteria. The first one is the Washington Street bypass. And as we zoom in on this, you'll see that what we're having is there'd be a portion of I-84 that would remain as a business loop. The existing to the north through the city would remain as what we'd call a business loop. But I-84 would bend to the south and combine with Route 8. So we'd have a section there, basically between existing I-84 and Washington Street that would be a 10-lane, 5 lanes in each direction, combined highway. Then I-84 would break off and would look to carry through where the Washington Street, Washington Avenue corridor is today, and then combine back in with I-84 to the east. Now, even at the level 1, not going any further than that, but looking at the level 1 criteria, this option failed. What we were finding is the first issue that we looked at was the vertical constraints here down and along the railroad, being able to carry through with Route 8 northbound and to make the connections for 84 coming over and getting into that east-west corridor through the Washington Avenue corridor. So we had our vertical constraints there. We also had a constructability issue looking at how we were going to construct I-84 and maintain the existing viaduct due to the curvature and how we had to align 84 and combine this 10-lane section. We had to go to the north of the existing. So being able to find an opening in the existing viaduct, I-84 viaduct structure to get to the north side was not feasible. The last constraint or trouble that we were finding with this option was this very short length of these weaves for people to make these moves across, if they wanted to go from Route 8 or, to make their system connection. So that weave was very short. So if we go to our report card, what we're finding is that this failed on the geometric criteria. It also failed on the traffic operational criteria. And then we were also finding constructability issues. So this alternate failed and is not advancing forward. All right. The last alternate that failed, and this is a replacement alternate, and this is on a tunnel concept. And with the tunnel, we'd look to take a portion of the roadway, and if we look at the core of the interchange, taking a tunnel through here, we'd have a lot of we have our topography to deal with. So that really constrains what could be done with a tunnel, plus making all of our system connections. So a tunnel concept is what we think of as a tunnel would not advance because we're not meeting our modern design standards. The cost would be unreasonable, and we'd have, significant challenges with our topography. Well, one thing that we would look at and consider as a complementary feature is not a tunnel as we think about it, but more of a depressed expressway section, and then build over top of the expressway, in effect, creating a tunnel. And this is something we kind of looked at, and it was looked at further east on I-84 between South Elm Street and Baldwin as possibly being able to build over and recapture some space over the highway as we put I-84 into a tunnel. So now as we go forward, looking at these, I want to pause again and see if there are any questions or if any popped up in the chat box. Okay. All right, we'll be here if anything comes up, if there are any questions. So our next slide, I think of this where I turn it back to you, Naomi, or do I still have more to go through? No, this is all you.
Yeah, this will be me. So I do want to just, before we wrap this up, I do want to just touch upon some of the complementary features. I don't want to get that confused with the complementary features, but complementary features are those favorable aspects of the alternative that could be feasibly incorporated in any of the advancing alternatives for further considerations. David mentioned a few, and those include, tunneling limited portions of the main line, the I-84 main line. So that's that capping concept of putting a lid over a depressed segment of the highway. A lot of local road improvements to improve some of the way that the main lines interact with the local road, incorporating a fifth crossing of the Naugatuck River, roundabouts within the city of Waterbury, those other modes of travel. And there are a few more that we have not specifically touched upon, such as, where we can move the main line, such as I-84 to the south. But these are some of the unique complementary features that you may continue to see as we carry these forward where feasible into the advancing alternatives. And I do want to note that additional could be identified as, this Pell study progresses and as more design is completed during the Pell study. Did want to highlight the 9 alternatives that are proposed to be advancing into the level 2 level of screening, where they will be developed with more detail. We'll get into additional considerations and criteria at the level 2 analysis. That includes more information about urban design, community and environmental considerations. Did want to mention that these conceptual alternatives that are proposed to pass this initial level of screening will be called initial alternatives to be further evaluated into the level 2 screening. Do want to pause here to see if there are any questions about these advancing alternatives. We will have a chance to go through these in more detail in subsequent PAC meetings, but did just want to have this meeting to focus on the aspects and alternatives that we are proposing to be dismissed and not looked at further as our study progresses. just as a quick reminder, this is our very familiar funnel graphic for our screening process. We do have 3 levels of screening proposed for the new mixed PEL study, trying to identify those PEL recommendations or the range of reasonable alternatives. While this first level of screening was either pass or fail, as we continue in the screening process, we'll get more detailed. It won't be as cut and dry as pass or fail, but there will be alternatives that will advance, and we would propose to not advance based on the provided benefits or negative impacts that alternatives may exhibit as we continue to develop and identify more information for these alternatives. And I did just want to put this back on the screen so everyone can see how the universe of alternatives shook out with this initial level of screening, with the 9 advancing alternatives with the white background. Just wanted to pause here to see if there were any questions on this aspect of the screening.
Yeah, good morning. I just have one quick question or comment.
Yeah.
Mark Nielsen with NVCOG. A lot of information. I mean, it's very
absolutely.
detailed. I appreciate it. There's a lot of work that went into coming up with these alternatives and assessing, the pros, cons, and coming up with the pass fail. But I guess my first initial thought was, so it sounds like the complete reconstruction of the mixed master is sort of being taken off future consideration. Is that a fair statement, or
the reconstruction in place? I want to make sure that the in place reconstruction of 84 is proposed to be dismissed.
Right.
The other reconstruction or replacement alternatives would propose to reconstruct the entire interchange, but on a different alignment.
Okay, so I know the original concept from a lot of years ago, where they were talking about destacking the interchange. That's not the same as reconstructing in place then?
The reconstruction in place would propose to unstack the structures.
Right. Okay. So, and again, I think that's a big determination, because again, it's always been sort of thought that was always going to be a possibility of, the complete reconstruction of the interchange, essentially in place and destacking the facility. Not that, again, I understand, through your analysis, it is kind of a difficult thing to actually achieve, and we all know that. I also think, the pass that was given for the cost may be off too, because that was going to probably be the most expensive alternative out there. So, and a cost criteria, I'm not sure if I would have passed it, but it's just a comment, and just so I understand that we're looking at a number of other alternatives, not that now won't include the full reconstruction of the facility.
In place, Mark, yeah, and if you look at a bunch of the alternates that or even a lot of them where we reconstructed I-84 to the south, we're not very far to the south from the existing. We're very tight to it.
Right.
What was being found by the designers is that we were able to maintain traffic and the existing viaduct. We would lose some of the system connections during construction, but by building just to the south, we'd be able to keep the main lines open. And it was meeting our, as we were looking at our constructability analysis, we were able to, it would work. So that was one thing we looked at.
All right. All right, thanks. Like I said, it's, it's just a lot of information to digest. And, again, I think, the way you're presenting it is good, and it really demonstrates a lot of effort that went into the analysis. So, I appreciate that. And, it's like you said, it's still a work in progress. So still a lot of decisions to be made.
Absolutely. And I
Yep.
did want to
Thank you.
also state for the cost criteria, because we didn't perform a true cost benefit analysis at this level, just because it is so high level. We really just looked at if funds could be made available for an alternative. So as we progress in the Pell study, and as we get through, I believe the third level of screening is where we'll have the most detailed cost analysis available on the remaining alternatives to see what exactly we are anticipating the cost to be for the advancing alternatives.
Naomi, we do have a question in the chat box.
Yes, I did notice that from Ms. Elm. Is it possible that none of the remaining alternatives would pass in the level 3 analysis? So as I mentioned, that the analysis as we move forward in this screening will become a little bit more nuanced and won't be as cut and dry as this initial analysis. So we'll be looking at options that are more beneficial and less beneficial. If it's determined that there are, fatal flaws that remain in some alternatives, those may fail, but we don't anticipate having no alternatives remaining at the end of the Pell study. We're hoping to conclude this Pell study with a range of reasonable alternatives. So there still are anticipated to be impacts or benefits and some negatives with the alternatives, the groups of alternatives that may advance into the NEPA phase, so after the Pell study, but not anticipating that there won't be any alternatives at the end of this Pell study. Okay. Just gonna see if there are any other questions. So I did want to highlight that if there are any questions or comments or concerns, please feel free to email myself, and we'll get answers. The project team will get answers to you all, and also any comments received will be documented into our Pell study documents. Since, as Mark did mention, this was a lot of information, we wanted to give you all enough time to sit with this presentation and see this information as on your own time, when you have the time, and even listen back to this this recording if you have the time, and then provide any feedback or input that you may have with regard to the alternatives that we are proposing to dismiss at this point in time. Today is Monday the 25th, and we're looking for comments by August 29th. That's about a month, a little more, and looking to get these comments before our next public information meeting, which will be in the fall or early fall after Labor Day.
Hello, Martin Spring, Waterville Community Club.
Hi, Martin.
Hi, I'm still on the phone. I can't really do Zoom. I brought this up a couple meetings, and when we travel on 84 and Route 8 or whatever, you guys got to do something about the speeding. I mean, somebody's got to do something. Somebody's going to get killed. I mean, getting off the exit, getting on the exit, people coming on, and it's like they almost cut you off, and the tractor trailers are flying down the road, and just heavy duty traffic all over the place. I appreciate everything you guys do, but I'm so concerned about some of my friends are DOT workers. I'm so concerned about them getting hit by cars, and I told Karen, I would never take a job out there like that. I mean, these people just zoom by. I mean, I seen some stuff that you guys got some plans on there, on the table, if you will, with like solar do not speed signs, and that's a great thing. And I've seen them around, you know, all over, basically on all the highways and byways throughout the state of Connecticut. Do a lot of traveling in my job. But I just said, for the life of me, my God, you know, I mean, this is the summertime. You can imagine when winter comes. I mean, you know, we really got to focus on speeding. And people just speed too much. And, you know, I just want to bring that up because I think that's a key point here in this discussion.
Yeah, thank you, Martin. Did want to, we definitely are aware of those safety concerns. I did want to highlight that work zone safety is definitely a consideration as we move forward in our health study screening analysis. A lot of the considerations that we look at with regard to the feasibility and constructability aspect is those are those work zone safety concerns, and the longer construction is out there, the more dangerous and more accidents that could happen due to just the length of time. So looking at options that could minimize, you know, construction impacts, also, you know, increased signing and other options like that, we can always propose and encourage for whenever this project will ultimately go to construction, which will be, you know, a little bit ways down the lines, but I do know that the DOT are looking at ways always to improve work zone safety and just general safety as well. So I appreciate that.
Okay,
thank you.
well, I appreciate your indulgence, and I appreciate everything you guys do, and thank you for being very kind and considerate about that, because like I said, friends of mine work for the DOT, and some of them are retired veterans, and I don't want to see them get hurt up on the highways. They're just trying to, you know, provide for their families. That's all they're trying to do. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Martin.
Just have adding to that, Naomi, is, you know, I mean, Martin, one thing we do look at is with these, the right-hand entrances and right-hand exits is more what a driver is expecting to see when they're out there, where the faster traffic is going to the left. And it's that speed differential that we talk about. If somebody's slowing down to take a left exit or they're coming on from the left, you have that bigger speed differential. That's an important aspect as to why we want to have all our exits and our entrances, as many as we can on the right side where it's more feasible, is to help, you know, meet that driver expectancy as travel is out there and help keep, you know, helps keep the flow safer.
But yeah, I do appreciate that, and thank you very much.
Okay, so just to talk about upcoming meetings and future PAC agenda items, I did want to highlight what we are calling PAC meeting 4B. It is independent of our PAL study decision-making process, if you want to consider it that way. But at this meeting, we'd like to present the potential early action projects. We do have a couple, and I know that that was a topic of interest to many of the PAC members. We are anticipating that to occur also in September in conjunction the same month as the public information meeting number 2. It is independent of our decision-making process, but did want to allow any PAC members to attend that meeting just to get some more information about what those potential early action projects could end up being, and what we're proposing to be a viable early action project. And then again, we have our second public information meeting. It says early fall here, but we're anticipating it also being in September. That will present the universe of alternatives to the public, as well as the level 1 screening criteria. So as I mentioned, PAC members, you all are ahead of the public. It'd be great to get your input on these preliminary decisions, so that as we continue to go through this process, we can incorporate those considerations and consider that input as we present and ultimately present these items to the public. And then our 4C meeting, which will be pertinent to our decision-making process in the Pell study, that is anticipated in October. That's where we will present the level 2 screening measures. We'll talk about some of the urban design considerations, some of the design progression and what we would be looking at in the level 2 screening. I do know that I believe it was Julia of the Housatonic Valley Association asked for a projected schedule. We were able to put together a long-term schedule, anticipated schedule for these PAC meetings. I'm looking to get that out to you all with our post-meeting email. And I did want to highlight that since this Pell study is in flux, we are, constantly getting feedback and new information and input from not only you all, but agencies, city government, and the general public. All of this information is in flux, and those dates may move in a little bit as we may, need more time to do more analysis or to fit in an additional meeting if we determine it to be necessary. But did want to make sure that I note that we did not forget about that, and we will be issuing that schedule, that anticipated schedule in the next communication that we have with you all. And I guess before we wrap up, just continue to go through this information that we put together. You all should have a copy of this presentation files in your inbox. So feel free to just peruse through it, explore the project website. If you have any questions, feel free to send out an email. You can use the project website, or you can send it directly to myself, and we'll get you an answer as soon as we can. And again, I did want to just highlight that we do have some exciting new features hopefully coming out soon on the website, such as the universe of alternatives and other aspects that you all can spend some time looking through and reading up on some information when you have that time. So looking forward to our next meeting, and appreciate all the time that you all have volunteered for our PAC meeting. And I will pause again to see if there are any additional questions or comments or any items of consideration at this point in time before we end our meeting a little early.
So Naomi, in the meantime, this is Anil Patel, DOT. I just wanted to make mention of, in preparation of the next public meeting, maybe seeing our team, our project team out in the community, attending certain events, try to get the word out and spread the, get some information out to the public, with some at some pop-up events, and you'll see a table probably with our project team. So, and if there's any other recommendations into any other community events that you think would be beneficial for our team to attend, please let us know.
Yes,
We'll
please.
make sure we get the word out to everybody. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah. All right, with that, just thank you all for hanging in there and joining us for this presentation. And you'll be hearing from myself and the project team soon on some upcoming information and additional meetings. So thanks again, and enjoy the rest of your week. Take care.
Thank you. Have a good
Good night.
day.
Thank you. Yep. Bye now. Bye.
Thank you.